Welcome to SubOptic Spotlight. I'm your host, Eric Kontag, President of the SubOptic Association. On behalf of SubOptic's Executive Committee, as well as our members and friends, I'd like to thank you for joining us for our fourth Spotlight event in our Navigating COVID-19 series of executive roundtables. You can now also register for future events directly from the menu toolbar during this online event. Today's Spotlight, sponsored by Alcatel Subsea Networks, DRG Undersea Consultants, GlobeNet, Google, JSA, and Xtera, will focus on maintaining global supply continuity. The creativity, perseverance, and dedication of individuals throughout our communications industry, together with a backbone just too strong for COVID-19 and overall challenges to break. Our teams have found ways to continue to build new networks and data centers, plus to upgrade, maintain, and operate existing ones. Both our teams and our global communications fabric are resilient, despite challenges throughout the global supply chain. Today, our panelists will provide examples of how they've conquered some of these supply chain challenges and what lessons this has forced our teams to uncover, which may provide more effective and efficient methodologies for the future. Just as telecommuting, which became a COVID-19 imperative, proved so successful that it's now widely accepted as a future reality, our industry has developed its own set of workarounds, many of which may become new norms. Some of these had roots and developments already underway, others are entirely new. I'm sure you'll find today's roundtable fascinating. SubOptic is very pleased again to have another outstanding lineup of industry executives and experts to share their insights with you. To help us introduce our panelists and moderate today's event, please welcome to our online stage, Mr. Ed McCormack, well known to and highly respected by many of us throughout the undersea communications world for his many contributions to networks across the globe. Ed, this Spotlight virtual floor is yours.
Thank you, Eric, for the introduction, and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, as the case may be. Let me just add a big thank you to JSA for providing the platform for the series as well. And I'm also delighted to be here with this very distinguished panel. On this Spotlight, we have a guest speaker from outside the submarine cable industry. While we provide critical communications infrastructure across the globe, we're not alone, actually. The satellite industry also plays a vital role and a complementary role to us in submarine. So we wanted to take the opportunity to get insights from a leader in the satellite industry into how it's coping with the impact of COVID-19. So let me introduce the panel, and I'll start with our guest. JP Hemingway is the CEO of SES Networks. Some of you may remember O3B, the other 3 billion. That has now become SES Networks, and we're delighted to have the CEO, JP, spend time with us to talk about the satellite contribution during these past few months. Next, we have Leigh Frame. Leigh is COO of Xtera and has a long history of installing major submarine cable systems. He's seen the market transition from the traditional turnkey build to the emerging open systems that are common today. Also on the supply side, from the equipment supply side, comes Alison Wilson. She is a VP of Global Fulfillment at Ciena, and she leads a team that manages customer demand, assembles orders, schedules hundreds of shipments around the world every month. So she is very much at the front end in getting the supply chain to work for Ciena. Abdullah Alsamhan, General Manager for Submarine Systems at Saudi Telecom, and STC has long been a leader in the submarine consortia cable market, And Abdullah has chaired management committees on many systems like CMUE4, CMUE5, IMUE, etc. Then we have Oliver Jones as CEO of Chayora. Chayora is an international investor, developer, and operator of major data centers. It has a primary focus in Asia and in China and is headquartered in Hong Kong. And of course, Asia was at the forefront of this outbreak, so we have some interesting things to hear from him. And last, but by no means least, is Dean Veverka. Dean is the CEO of Southern Cross. It's a 30,000 kilometre network and still building. Dean is based in Australia, and we appreciate the taking time at this late hour there. So that's our panel for today, and we'll open with JP as our special guest, and I'm going to ask JP to give some real life experience from a complementary industry, and perhaps JP, you can actually give us a high level view of the service you provide and whether you managed to maintain continuity during this period, and generally how robust your supply chain was in unexpected circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely, Ed. And first off, let me start with the pleasure to be invited to be part of this esteemed panel. I feel like somewhat the outsider because we're not part of this, directly part of the SubOptic community, but I think hopefully I can provide a few perspectives that are relevant to us all. As you correctly say, we're all about providing global communications infrastructure and services. So I think there's a lot of parallels there. So for those who don't know SES Networks, I mean, Ed, you did a great intro, but we're a provider of satellite-based connectivity services. We own and operate, over 55 geostationary satellites, or GEOs as we call them, and 20 medium Earth orbit MEO satellites, the O3B that you mentioned, for that sort of low latency, high throughput services. And we deliver managed services to remote locations, in the hearts of countries, island nations, to governments, and the mobility markets such as aviation and shipping. There's just some examples. Now, I guess what we think is we have a global reach. In theoretical reach of maybe 99% of the Earth's population, we can deliver some kind of service to. So I think that's one of our superpowers, we tend to call this global reach capability. I think we provide a lot of primary links. We are the primary interface, the primary internet, the primary service to a lot of the customers that we serve, or indeed we're sometimes a resilient service. And that's probably the greatest intersection I'd say that we have with the submarine world, is that we're often a secondary connection to some of these nations that we both collectively serve, so we can back each other up. I've just noticed my camera is a little bit fuzzy, so I'm just going to correct that if that's okay. Okay, hopefully that's better. So I think there's some complementary there where we provide resilient links for each other's customers, and I think that's something we see every day. We're not doing terabits of information, but we're certainly doing gigabits. So I summarize it, we tend to think of, our whole mantra is that we do the amazing in space, because space is pretty cool, frankly, to deliver extraordinary experiences everywhere on Earth. And frankly, it's been pretty humbling these last few weeks and months about some of the services we've been able to provide in extreme hurry, particularly in the field of telemedicine that I'll come on to in a short while. But you asked specifically about sort of how we maintain continuity of service there. I guess there's two parts to that. In the operational side, we have two major sets of operations, one of which is our space operations centers, SOCs as we call them, where we actually fly the satellites. We don't fly them non-stop, but we have to make sure that they are where they need to be and move them around as necessary. And then we have standard NOCs. We're a global managed service provider, so we have sort of 24/7 NOC capability. I'm sure, like all the panelists who run networks, we have to go into pretty unusual circumstances, full business continuity, running red, blue, sometimes red, blue, green teams, full sanitization between all those teams coming in. And in fact, we actually went to a complete virtual shift on a number of occasions where nobody was in those NOC or SOCs, and we ran everything virtually using sort of some of the remote software tools. Really pleased to see that it actually was flawless. We had no issues at all of running these very unusual NOC and SOC capabilities, and in some kinds remotely. I will say one of the more interesting examples that we had during this interesting time, look, and one of the segments that we provide connectivity to is the cruise market. And the cruise, as you've seen, has been devastated by this. It was the public face of a lot of the things. You saw these vessels in Japan and places where they were pretty much stranded. So our operations team had to swing into action here. So we were able to ramp up the capacity to these ships, and we typically do hundreds of megabits to a gigabit to these ships. When all of these passengers are stranded there, wanting to reach home to their loved ones, both the crew and the passengers, we're able to remotely turn up the capacity to enable them to offer free Wi-Fi so they could have that connectivity back to their loved ones, which was good to be part of. But more recently, the operations teams, we've had to deal with some really unusual itineraries. You've all been watching on TV where these cruise ships have been looking for a port they can dock at. More recently, they've been trying to take all of their staff home all around the globe, and our operations teams trying to track, satellite beam to satellite beam and satellite to satellite, as we've been trying to track these ships going around their completely unique global itineraries. So super proud of our operations team who've been managed to maintain service throughout all of their capabilities. And on the supply chain point, to just tee that up, I guess there's 3 or 4 places that we think of in supply chain. There's the satellites themselves, and we do have a number of new satellites being built today. We have a GEO satellite under construction, and we have 7 new super-powered MEO O3b power satellites being constructed as we speak, ready for launch next year. They are typically classed as critical providers or critical workers, and they operate in these extreme clean room environments because these are, very complex bits of equipment. And in general, to date, the supply chain has been fairly continuous on there, and we'll see if that continues over the coming period. The second is around gateways. These are aggregation points. These are the teleports. Sometimes you hear that phrase as well. And we have had a number of new builds, which are fairly major construction sites, though we have had some challenges where some of the countries have been in lockdown for how many materials we can get to site, how many workers we can have on site. So again, some of the new builds we're doing have had some delays, and we're working through those delays. Where they're active, supplying our end customers, we typically have spares at those sites, and we typically over-provision those sites because they're the hubs that serve many thousands of customers downstream. So we've managed to maintain continuity of service by having spares and over-provisioned hubs to serve the end customers. And lastly, before I sort of, send it back to you, Ed, we serve really remote places. I'm talking truly, truly remote, where you can take hours to get to these locations, and the logistics of getting equipment there, making sure that we can leverage both our stocks and our partner stocks, and actually having installation engineers coming to site has been something we've had to pretty much change how we do that. And again, we can maybe talk about that in some examples later on.
Very good. So possibly, maybe we go on to maybe one of those remote locations. It'd be interesting to hear of a challenge and an achievement. And actually, in the same context, I'd like to ask Dean to jump in at the end, and because he also serves quite a few remote islands, and perhaps give a comment or a question to JP.
Yeah, so some of the things we have to do differently, and even not at the remote end, is that we had to set up a task force. We knew that we were going to get asks to increase capabilities and get equipment and services rolled out quickly. So we put together a task force running in a follow the sun basis. It has sales and development people, technology people, running things like, as we call them, lineups. In the optical world, think about link budgets, but same kind of thing. Legal teams, commercial teams, and that task force basically responded into something that, let's just say it takes, I don't know, a number of weeks normally to turn around an opportunity from lead to completion. We give that target 24 hours. And it's done super well. We've turned around some things in an incredible hurry. Of course, me running that business, I'm now asking that team, why don't we do that always? Why do we take 3 to 4 months when 24 hours will work? So we're gonna, my team are digesting that feedback. But some of the remote installations we have, so we have been deploying service into the heart of Africa, in DRC, and remote parts of Pakistan as a region, as a couple of examples. Even when we have the equipment there, we typically rely on fairly specialized engineers to commission the equipment, particularly when it's there to deliver gigabits of services. We've had to completely rethink that. We've had to look at using local engineers, remote training, remote quality checks to make sure we can still complete those installations. And a couple of examples, if I may, Ed. One example that springs to mind is in Mexico. And this lead or opportunity came through our legal and regulatory team, which is not typically where you get opportunities coming from, but in this case, they had a great relationship with the Mexican government, and they heard that they were looking to mobilize the hospitals, getting ready for the COVID relief, taking X-rays, taking scans, remote diagnostics, and speaking to the larger cities. So we responded to that very, very quickly. We mobilized our team. We worked with the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Telecom, Telecom Mexico as our partner, and ourselves, and really pulled together is how could we serve those customers. We got something that got done typically with large complex consortia like that. That's typically a 3 to 4 month process. We got 35 hospitals commissioned in 2 weeks, which is exceptional. Now, this isn't super high throughput, but these are hospitals that had no access to connectivity before, and now they can send their scans off, send their X-rays, and more importantly, have data come and be exchanged, so they know where these health cases are coming from. So, I'm super proud of that. I know the team that worked on it, and it really just teamwork that got stuff done. Our local partner had some capabilities. They had trained people, and we did all of that at no cost, because we thought the Ministry of Health would be better served focusing on PPE equipment and their staffing. Another one was in East Timor, where they needed capacity in a hurry, and they really needed it within days. And again, we had to steer a satellite beam, which normally takes some kind of coordination efforts. We had to change the entire config from a point-to-point to a multi-point network, so complete network reconfig. I would say in the very best world, that's a 3 to 4 day adventure. The team did it in 12 hours. So basically just breaking all the rules and saying, let's just get stuff done. The remote Amazonas region of Colombia, where we had sort of fairly high COVID cases for that region, but the lowest internet penetration. Again, I worked with the Ministry of Telecommunications, our partner Skynet, and basically upgraded their services so they could provide free Wi-Fi hotspots for their residential, their consumers, and their businesses to remain educated and informed on the COVID crisis. And also they had a dedicated broadband service for the hospitals. So, that region we serve, by the way, is pretty much 2G only. So you can imagine the difference it's made to those folks to have broadband available to provide those. And there's many more examples, Ed. What I'd say, my takeaway is challenge your internal processes. Why does something take 3 to 4 months if you can get it done in 24 hours? We should all take learnings away from that. Our global partnerships have been absolutely key. Where we're managing supply and inventory between us and our local partnerships, challenging ourselves that we always need our absolute highest dedicated engineers, where we can train local engineers, and then you have local engineers for the future and sustaining of that business through the lifetime of the service. And really the cross-functional teams we've set up, whether they're complex with governments, multiple partners, equipment providers, satellite operators like ourselves, if you just step up and show leadership, work collaboratively, you can get stuff done. We have got simply extraordinary things done, literally in hours, a couple of days, or in worst case, weeks, when it would normally take months. So there's some massive learnings for us all, I think, that we can take for that, Ed.
Fantastic, fantastic. What a learning. Dean, any thoughts from you? You're probably working with satellite companies down there.
We are. We're actually working with SES. Look, thanks, Ed, and thank you, SubOptic, for allowing me to be part of this panel. I will correct you on one thing, Ed, because I know my boss is watching. I'm not the CEO of Southern Cross, only the CTO. So,
Okay.
Not trying to take it.
Okay. Sorry about that, Dean.
So we're us submarine guys have always been jealous of the satellite business. You've got a very sexy, cool product that's visible, whether it's a satellite or an earth station. All we're peddling is a garden hose buried at the bottom of an ocean. As you probably know, Southern Cross is building new cables through the Pacific, and we are picking up a couple of these islands now that have no cable to them yet, and do rely on, as you said, the primary source of communication is their satellite, which will then probably fall back to a backup role once we connect to them. I just want to ask you, JP, we've seen, and we can't get our installers to these islands. They've completely shut their borders. They've stopped shipments. They've stopped air flights. If they do have an airline, an airport there, are you seeing a general nervousness from your customers that you serve there, because they're literally only connection to the outside world now through these COVID times is through your satellite links? And how do you assuage those fears and worries from the governments of those small island nations?
Yeah, it's a great point, Dean. And I do see that companies like ourselves work pretty collaboratively and often, as you said, cable and satellite is used in conjunction. But as you said, when they've had to lock down their borders to really, cease any sort of inbound or outbound COVID cases, it's really put a keen emphasis on the quality of the installation and making sure the spares are there in the first place to make sure that if they need to replace anything, they need to become more self-sufficient. We had a slurry of asks that came in saying that we're a little bit concerned that, either things are being delayed, maybe the cable was coming in, it was being delayed or something. Can you ramp up the capacity? Or if we're all working from home, we're consuming way more than we used to. So can you guarantee us that we can burst? Can you burst up to a certain amount of capacity? Do we have the contract to do so? All those kind of things. I think our learning from this thing is we just increased it. We're worried about the paperwork second. We're worried about everything else. This was about people at the end of the day. So, so yes, we need to follow up and make sure that spares are there. We need to make sure that the resilience is there, that we've got automatic failovers with the cables and satellite. All that's for the future. But the ultimate thing is just turn those services up, and then we'll catch up with contracts and paperwork afterwards, because ultimately people just need to be informed about this stuff. So that was my biggest takeaway there.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thanks very much, JP. And now we're going to go and ask you very briefly around the table, the virtual table. What's the biggest supply chain challenge that you've experienced in relation to COVID-19? And if we go quickly around the table clockwise, I'll start with Abdullah.
Okay, so and the main challenge which we see, it is the restriction of the government of the moving the people to different places and their jobs, and also the travel of the supply engineers from their company to get support for the upgrade or new installation of the system, plus the difficulty of the travel of these people moving from country to the country. So this is the main thing which I see it challenging on this industry now.
Lovely, thanks, Abdullah. Oliver?
Slightly similar. The main issue for us, and we operate in mainland China, was that COVID erupted in China right over Chinese New Year, at which point all of our workforces had returned to their homes and their villages in various parts of China. And therefore, it wasn't so much about the materials and equipment, it was absolutely about the people. And, all the time that there was lockdown, which was pretty stringent in China, you simply can't move between towns, let alone between provinces. So the biggest issue in supply chain was everyone faced the same problem. Chinese New Year meant there was no one nearby. That was our experience. We'll talk more later about some of the other.
Very interesting. And Leigh?
Yeah, hi Ed. So for Xtera as a system supplier, I think we found the biggest challenge is trying to pick some out of the project manufacturing and operational side, is probably keeping the momentum on permitting in preparation for surveys and site surveys, the marine survey and site survey, particularly with some of the agencies furloughed. And probably for similar reasons, challenges around export and import logistics, getting finished product to the final customer. They'd be ours, I think.
Yeah. Interesting. Alison?
Yeah, I think for us, it was really, we were living our business continuity plan. And not only were we living our business continuity plan, we were living our customers' business continuity plans, as well as our partners and CMs. So it was relentless. As the COVID wave went around the world, it triggered another set of asks, expectations. So it was relentless. It was.
Very good, very good. And finally, Dean?
I'd have to agree with Oliver on a slightly different vein, but certainly it was our human resources. So at the end of the day, it was all about our people, and whether that was the challenge of having everyone work from home and therefore having to monitor their health and their mental health, which is certainly a key safety issue for us looking after our staff, or even just trying to get people to into countries or places that were on lockdown. It really was all about the people, and we were relying on those people to solve all of our other issues, right? So very key for us.
Interesting, very interesting. I think the people side of it always comes up. Now, I'm going to go into a little more detail, and I'm going to focus for a few minutes on the supply side here, with Leigh on the system build side and Alison on the equipment supply. And can we start with you, Leigh, and tell us, how do you think the supply chain changed to maintain your supplies, to deal with the restrictions that you faced?
Yeah, thanks, Ed. We've seen a lot of changes as the lockdown and the crisis has evolved. I mean, I think the subsea industry is naturally or has natural resilience and redundancy built in, and that has allowed supply chains and system supply to be maintained. So, for an extended period, we can carry on. Stocks are there, and so on, but not indefinitely. So those activities involving close interaction, training, installation work, site and survey work, and also the new business activities, eventually we'll see a slowdown there, I think. And the other medium-term problem is that system suppliers have got issues traveling to their vendor community, so undertaking quality checks, qualifying new vendors or new processes. It's manageable for a certain period of time, and we've succeeded in managing it. But if the crisis continues, eventually it could well have an impact on quality, delivery, or cost, or we'll have to find different ways of managing it. There's a big positive with our model is the contract manufacturing that we use, and the imperatives of other customers for those contract manufacturing facilities, as well as our own, means that those companies have stayed open and working. And our key partner has high rail defence experience, in addition to ISO 9000, and so their facilities have additionally been put to use manufacturing ventilators and so on. This is great, as it means there's no restart, no ramp up on restart. But it's clear that the present crisis reinforces the merits and the demerits of the supply choices that we set when we set up our supply chains. So if you set it up with weaknesses at the start, you're going to be in trouble now, I would say. But so far, so good.
Very interesting, Leigh. If we move on to Alison and get your thoughts, and perhaps pick up on a couple of points that Leigh made there as well. He talked about stocks being very important and contract manufacturers being quite important to them. Perhaps you can comment on that, in addition to what you found as an equipment supplier.
Yeah, so I think the biggest change from us was whatever cycles, monthly or weekly planning or execution cycles we had, we very quickly moved into what was a daily operating rhythm, given how COVID was moving out around the world. And that involved us to have much closer engagement with initially our customers to understand their demand changes. Some customers had increasing demand on products we were aware of. We had some asks on products that they hadn't been driving, so some unexpected demand asks. Our engagement with our contract manufacturers globally, and those guys were key to our ongoing capability to continue to build product. We have 3 key manufacturing partners spread around the world, and their business continuity plans also kicked into place, both from their people perspective, but also their ability to continue to build our product. But again, it was daily engagement with those guys. We have a number of key OEMs in China, Malaysia, the Philippines, New Zealand. I mean, every country that in some way was impacted as COVID went around the world. So again, daily engagement with those guys. And to touch on a point actually that JP made, our legal team really came into play in supporting us with lobbying governments or helping our partners lobby their government or their state legislator to provide documentation to enable them to remain open and operational. And then probably a key one, particularly in given the role that I have within Ciena, was our engagement with our logistics partners. I think Leigh touched on this as well. Our ability to continue to ship product to our customers, as well as support some of our vendors in getting component material into our CMs. So key engagement with our logistics partners to enable that supply chain to keep moving, which also involved us talking to some of the customs authorities as well to keep our material moving through customs. So huge shift in that daily engagement with all our key partners and those open communications with our customers as well to understand their needs and be able to react to them.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Alison. Interesting that you know, in the cycle, it's about engagement, relentless daily engagement, and nice to hear that also the commercial and legal departments can play a role in terms of trying to knock down some roadblocks or accelerate the decisions in different countries. I'm wondering, Oliver, what your take is on that, and whether you've seen kind of the issue of just-in-time manufacturing impacted by what's going on here.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting area. I think with just-in-time manufacturing, that's great when everything's working, of course, and it's designed to squeeze slack out of the system and stock out of the workplace, and it's great in normal times. I think it shows a number of different issues. One is where you've got just-in-time and where you've perhaps got prefabrication that's taking place in a factory environment so that it can reduce the construction time on site. That becomes all the more important, because what we've seen is that if you get a disruption at the height of a particular construction activity taking place, the impact and the costs that will flow out from that are very significant. And naturally, the thing that JP was talking about earlier, which I think is super impressive, is when you're able to take a 4-month activity and you distill it down, I think he was saying, into 12 or 24 hours. And I'll be sitting down with our project colleagues to talk about the same thing with them. So I think that from the prefabrication side and the just-in-time manufacturing, you can't really deal with these global shocks. I mean, very few industries can. The good fortune, I think, for us, that everything stopped at the same time, and then actually everything started back with the factories going back into manufacturing in China just before the construction sites and those that they supply were put back into operation. So from our side, I think we just had to sit back along with everybody else and recognize that actually the shorter the period could be, the better. I think the big problem, if I look in other parts of the world, is where you've got a much more feathered ending and beginning of the COVID period. So taking longer to go into lockdown and actually taking much longer or a much bumpier exit from it. And given the options, I would prefer the environment that we've ended up in. It's been more draconian, but it's been more effective, I think, in control terms. It doesn't quite answer the question of just in time, but actually it highlights the problem of dependency on just in time. And you know, shortening everything is the best thing, lower risk.
Correct. In a shock like this, just in time doesn't help. But it's amazing how plans were changed so quickly to keep the network running. Now I'm going to move on to the service provider and the operator side, and we have Dean here and Abdullah. I'll start with Dean first on private systems, and we'll go on to talk about consortia with Abdullah. But how would you describe the logistical challenges you faced, and how have you coped in terms of personnel, movements, you know, getting equipment to where it needed to be? You know, you're also building a new cable. So as the CTO, you probably had a range of problems on your plate.
Yeah, I think we don't have enough time to cover everything in any detail. Like most carriers and capacity providers, we were hit early on with unforecasted capacity requests from our carrier customers. And that is obviously the result of greater use of streaming services, more people working from home, video conferencing going through the roof, etc. And at the same time, we saw a bit of a technology shift too. So we saw a lot of our customers shifting from maybe multiple 10G circuits up to and consolidating those into 100 gig pipes, etc. So we sort of hit with a double whammy of trying to provide capacity and maybe move to different interfaces and different technologies. So while we were able to meet that demand, put a lot of pressure on our upgrade projects then to get more capacity online. And so that's where we started finding our supply channel challenges. Luckily, we've developed a lot of strong relationships with our vendors and suppliers and partners over the many years. And this certainly helped us get through these challenges. And we found that there wasn't too much disruption to, say, our big ticket items, our big electronic items, etc. We found a lot more problems at the lower commodity end range, if you like. So fiber patch cords, DC power cables. As Oliver mentioned, as soon as Chinese New Year hit, factories shut down and then were slow to come back up. So that combined with then an increased demand for these things as supply dried up, or they became very expensive from alternate suppliers, meant that we had to scramble to find new sources of supply, which we probably hadn't used in the past. This was then compounded, of course, by shipping delays and delivery times, and just extended by the sheer global volumes of equipment that need to be shipped around the world. On the human resource side that I touched on before, we're suddenly blocked from sending people to our cable stations to do site surveys or to install, test, and commission equipment. And particularly, as I mentioned, in the island nations, which completely shut down their borders, we had to find new resources and come up with innovative ways to train local staff to the standards that we require to possibly install equipment. So we're providing video tutorials and more detailed installation instructions and getting them and teaching them new skill sets that they probably hadn't had before. But again, through teamwork, we found that, we overcame a lot of those difficulties. I guess from a project point of view, in a typical project, you might have one critical path. We found that we moved from having one critical path to multiple critical paths because there were so many different issues, whether it was equipment supply, people movement, etc. And credit to the project teams, they seemed to be solving the same problem sometimes day after day. And so we'd come up with a solution. The government would change a rule on travel restrictions or social distancing, and they'd have to resolve the same problem. So sort of a different dynamic to the normal way we would run projects. So I think to sum up, we wouldn't have got through this without all the efforts of our people and the teams, and particularly the relationship we build up with our vendors and suppliers. So I think that's a key going forward as well to develop these very tight relationships with your suppliers.
Very interesting, Dean. Interesting to hear that little lower level issues that might never have hit your radar screen suddenly become big problems.
Yeah.
Yes.
But we'll keep moving on to Abdullah, and we'd like to hear a little bit from you in terms of the consortia practices. How have they changed? Are they adopting different procurement strategies? How are they coping?
Okay, thank you. Yes, actually, we have good experience for existing system and new system. For existing system, actually, we have a very good and luckily successful story with Ciena. Ciena, actually, they are contracted for 3 major consortium cable, which it is Semi-5, IMEW, and EIG. So they are contracting for that one, and they do a lot of the support. To avoiding this thing, they are trying to training and contracting local subcontractor, which can help them and supporting their in the region. So I think this one good example, and I checked with the BGs and other cables project, and they said we are not too much affected by these things. So this one example of this successful and the consortium, and one of these strengths which get it Ciena when they're getting all these things. So their local supplier or local contractor which help them, they can set for one country different project. So it's one successful story we can say, and we are able to work on that, and by avoiding this traveling to train and contract local supplier, and the material, there is no problem for clearing and getting the material. This one, the existing system. For a new system, actually, we are able to launching and publishing the agreement of longest and submarine cable to Africa. And for us as STC, we are part of eight people of this cable system. This cable system, longest and biggest submarine cable. It's maybe now start by 8 fiber and can be reached to 16 fiber bear and 30,000 kilometers and 26 countries. So a huge cable, and we're able to launch these things. And we are able to moving the supplier. We are not getting any notification from the supplier about the plan of work, because it is now in starting and reviewing the design of the system and other things. So these two successful story, actually, we can bring it for the consortium and for the new and the existing system.
But if you think about systems today, Abdullah, that are on the drawing board, do you think that that the negotiation among consortium members will slow down now because you cannot meet face to face, and it is difficult to have the type of discussions that you used to conduct to get those systems through incubation?
It is actually a different thing. One, it is for existing system. We see people start flexible and decision easier because everyone need the capacity and to matching the demand and increase in the demand for the internet service. So for example, ongoing project, I think it is the people start to be more flexible. New cable system, which actually it is need a lot of face-to-face meeting, and there is possibility to meet and conference, but this new system, it is need more face-to-face. So this maybe could affecting some project which is not contracted or under discussion. So it is different from existing project to the new or non-contracted project.
Very good, but the consortia will adopt. And one of the things, obviously, we've all seen is the change in working practice, and particularly the almost 100% moving from home happening almost overnight, and I think quite successfully. So it leaves us with the whole issue of automation as a consideration, and security, and how we manage networks remotely. I'd just like to ask you, Oliver, what do you see as the implications here, short or medium term, of the changes in practices?
Well, I think, as some people have touched on, and JP certainly did at the beginning, crises stimulate innovation, and people look at things in different ways. They're prepared to believe the unbelievable, and they're prepared to do things in a different way. Two things I'd highlight. One is that at a very parochial level, at our site and our data center campus that we've got just outside Beijing, we've recognized that dependency on people factor needs to be designed out. And so we're bringing forward, accelerating the investment and reviewing of machine learning and of artificial intelligence and building control systems to the nth degree. We want to see if we can possibly reduce to zero personnel environments, which would be an ideal. Not great for the individuals, but great for the performance of the facility and the response to where we are. But at a macro level, the most interesting thing I've noticed recently in the People's Congress meeting that took place in Beijing about 3 weeks ago, there was some very big announcements. One of the more notable ones of Xi Jinping was that $1.4 trillion is being plowed in China into digital infrastructure. And that's in response to the recognition that this may well happen again and again and again. And whilst most countries, as you say, have performed remarkably under the stress that they've been placed under with the changes that have come in, when you start to see quite extraordinary amounts of money being cascaded in, and that's been picked up already by subsequent announcements by the big cloud players like Ali and Tencent, to how they're going to be committing that into R&D. I think the biggest change is that we are going to see, a step change, the likes of which people witnessed in the Second World War in technology terms. It's going to come. We're going to come out of this having leapt forward maybe 1 decade, perhaps even more in technology. And the good news is all of us are right at the heart of that. I think it's one of the positives to come out of this.
Mm-hmm. Very, very interesting. If I was to move on to another topic then, which is the whole issue of project management and schedule. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out over time. Will we see significant force majeure situations? Will we see companies facing liquidated damages? Will we see suppliers getting into financial distress? Perhaps it could start with yourself, Dean, in terms of how you see kind of projects being delivered and how you see the relationship continuing with suppliers and partners.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of parts to it, of course, but we're in the process, as you say, of building a new cable, Southern Cross Next, and so we've obviously been hit by the closure of factories and some delays. But again, I guess it comes back. We've had a strong relationship with our primary supplier for the past 20 years. They're building our next cable as well. So that has stood us in good stand because we all want to get on and build a high class and high performing system. So there's no loss of focus on turning out quality products. And I think with the help of, governments now recognizing that submarine cables are critical infrastructure, we're seeing greater support in terms of, and a couple of people have mentioned already, being able to turn to governments to help overcome some of these issues. You may be aware that the ICPC put out a call to governments highlighting the need of governmental support for things like ship movements and crew transfers, etc., which will all play a key role in rolling out new cable systems. That's probably one of the biggest unknowns. The factories have spun up again, and they're a known cycle of manufacturing. The unknown, I think, at the moment is how the ships can install those and how we can freight equipment to various depots and locations to do the installation. I think we're going to be in this new norm for a while. We've seen spikes in demands, as I mentioned, and that's brought forward a lot of our planning cycles. And as we mentioned before, Oliver mentioned about just-in-time construction. We're in a just-in-time supply market, so we normally withhold our capital and turn up capacity as we need it. And that allows us to take advantage of the latest technology and not buying equipment that becomes obsolete very quickly. So I think we're going to have to rethink some of that just-in-time supply model for us as well, looking at multiple suppliers and giving us more headroom in that space as well.
Mm-hmm. Diversity. Mm-hmm. Leigh, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, going forward, I think where we've seen customers optimizing their spares and sharing spares perhaps between locations, I think we'll see that spare sets at each location instead. I think the impact on a given project, I think, is going to depend on the stage that you're at in that project. The point that Nigel made on a couple of weeks ago on a webinar, and clearly, if you're trying to obtain permits and and the agency staff are furloughed, you've got a problem working around that. Although we are managing to at the moment. If you've got ships waiting to start their operations and the crew has to go into isolation for 14 days, that creates one difficulty. But I think a bigger difficulty is when schedules change, programs change, operational events occur, and the ability of the industry and of the system suppliers to adapt to that is obviously impeded. If you've got travel restrictions, you can't move reps around as quickly as you would like. Reps need to isolate and so on. So I think it goes back to a point that a couple of us have made, which is, you can live with this to some extent for some period of time, but the longer term, it gets harder. On the force majeure point, which is an interesting point, I've heard Stuart Blythe comment that this time it probably is force majeure. Nobody really anticipated this. Pandemic lockdown probably wasn't if we're honest, wasn't in many of our disaster recovery planning scenarios, nor was it in the US or UK governments either, for that matter. But it doesn't appear to have been. But when it comes around again, if it comes around again, then there's probably no escape in the force majeure clause. You will expect to have planned for it and to have made provision.
Very good. And Abdullah, do you see force majeure situations with your customer base now, or so your supplier base?
I check with the BGs and other things, and we receive some force majeure from some of the supplier, but we see it is not affecting the work. They are sending this one as protection for them, but we see the project is ongoing on. And actually, depend on the stage where you are in the project. If you are in advanced stage, so it is okay. It's no need a lot of installation, wiring, another thing. And even they what's called recover this problem by the local supplier or local subcontractor. So this one of the thing which lesson learned for the supplier to have some trained local supplier so they can support in any emergency like this. Plus, as mentioned by Leigh Frame, that regarding the spare, if people can sharing the spare and part of the consortium, it can and possible to agree before they are agreeing for mutual restoration. They give some capacity here and there. So the sharing of the spare and equipment, if they are same supplier, it's a good idea also to discuss it in the consortium on this regard. Plus, or agree to have some buffer spare or common spare in the what's called store of the supplier in the country or in the region. So it can be easy to move or transfer and using the local supply, local training people to do the work. So a lot of lesson actually we are getting from this problem, and as you know that every difficulty you will have other chance or you have other opportunity on that. So we need to look for the thing and the people for good planning.
Very. And Alison, how is it changing any of your strategies and working with your suppliers and partners?
Yeah, so I think a feature of supply chain is your ability to manage change with trade wars, etc., and your ability to react. So COVID has really given us an opportunity to test the resiliency of some of the strategies that we have in place. And very much some of those have played into our favour. So our VMI strategies and around our finished goods. But I think more of the focus in and around our component agility has really played to us being able to continue to supply the way we are currently. We have distribution partners around our components. We have driven stocks of our key components to be available for us and to our CMs. We have a second source strategy on a number of our key components that go into some of our Hot 100 products, as we would call them. And that second source strategy again came into play. So as China went dark, we moved to other countries, and then as China came back on, we were able to shift back again. So very much those resiliency strategies have played in our favour as we've managed our schedules going forward with demand changes and fluctuations. And I think a key thing that underpins that is the ability we
Hello. I think we've lost Alison. Is Alison there?
Technical.
Okay, well, we're actually coming towards the end, but there's a few quick questions that I would like to pose to you. Perhaps if we can go around the table with a very quick answer as we bring the topic to a close. We'll start with yourself, Oliver. Could you give us an example of a good experience you've had with suppliers or other stakeholders in this period?
Yeah, I think suppliers all recognizing that on this occasion, we're all in the same pot. We've got to work together. There's been some incredibly good collaboration that we've seen, and it's exciting, the innovation that's going to come out of that. That's the big plus for me in one line. Okay,
fantastic. Dean?
Similar, I'd call it flexibility of our suppliers and partners. Been great at finding solutions and willing to use whatever local resources they have to complete work and overcoming any skill gaps that these people may have. So, finding, a person that's in a location may not be their normal job, but get them in there to do it. So flexibility.
Tremendous, yeah. And Leigh?
Yeah, we've seen home working a more valuable tool than we expected, and it's even allowed us to keep our R&D activity going. But the business model that the company uses has been proven, I think. It's been a good experience.
Very good. And finally, Abdullah?
Yes, as mentioned, we have a successful story with the supplier, which using local engineer, trained engineer, and have multi-project in same country. So this one successful thing, and listen for the consortium member or people to make their decision very fast and quickly, because for unexpected something it's happened. So it is give us a lesson also for.
Excellent, tremendous. I'm going to do the same again with a quick round table. At this time, I would like to focus the simple question. Can you give me one example of a supply chain change during this period that is going to stay with us in the long term? So Oliver, we'll throw you in first again.
I'm having to think on my feet here, aren't I? But yes, big one from our side is that security, which has always been for us about physical security, monitoring security, has suddenly shifted to personal health security and the wellness factor. The role of security guards in terms of access control, temperature monitoring, maintaining breakout zones has been a shift that I don't think is going to go away. And I think we'll suddenly see a new dimension to many security professionals and organizations controlling large sites.
Excellent. And Dean?
Well, one thing that's certainly going to change is our business continuity planning. I think there's a number of lessons to be learned across the board that everyone is finding. So no matter how much how good your planning has been are certainly challenged in these times. Probably for us, our shift on reliance of single suppliers and our just-in-time model, as I mentioned before. So again, developing good working relationships with our partners and increasing the footprint of our supply chain.
And Leigh?
Yeah, just very quickly, I would say it's reinforced the value of proximity and simplification of the supply chain. Nothing beats having your vendors nearby.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And finally, Abdullah.
Yes, I think it's maybe a new thing which need to be talking between the consortium cable, and if they are working in same route, same country, they need to look some more cooperation to avoiding or minimizing any effect like this one. So it is a new area, new thing. We need to think about it in the consortium. So to minimize possible cooperation for this problem.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic, very good. Well, thank you all. I'm going to hand back to Eric in a minute. I think we leave the discussion almost on time and on a very optimistic note, because while we focused on many challenges, it is pretty clear that we have seen positive change as well. You all mentioned words like collaboration, engagement, probably less reliance on single suppliers and just in time, more caution, but probably the common thread among everything you say is about people. Maybe Oliver summed it up. It's about wellness, and I think we have a lot to be grateful for that the industry is doing so much to put health and safety at the forefront here, and I'm sure we're going to get through it and do just fine. Back to Eric.
Well, thank you, panelists. Thank you, Ed, for your insights on navigating COVID-19, maintaining global supply continuity. This roundtable provided us with key views, lessons learned, and new approaches to managing how we operate our networks in face of supply chain challenges. You said it great. You summed it up perfectly, Ed. And I'm astounded at our ability to adapt and our ability to innovate as an industry. So again, thank you very much to all of our star panelists, JP Hemingway, CEO of SES Networks, Abdullah Alsamhan, CME 5 Chair and General Manager of STC, Oliver Jones, CEO of Chayora, Dean Veverka, CTO of Southern Cross, Alison Wilson, Vice President of Global Fulfillment at Ciena, and Leigh Frame, CEO of Xtera. And a big thank you to our guest moderator, Ed McCormack, for moderating SubOptic's 4th online Spotlight Roundtable. And I would like to thank our viewers for joining us today, in particular during these challenging times. Please visit SubOptic to register for our upcoming roundtable. Just 1 week from today, on June 17th at 9 a.m. Eastern Time, where we will be maintaining network continuity as our focus for the roundtable. Joining me and being moderated by Lane Stafford, Managing Partner, our DRG Undersea Consulting. We're also pleased to have with us Andy Lumpson, Head of Principal Engineering and Operations at Telstra International, Sohail Qadir, Vice President of Womantel, Jean-Luc Villeneuve, Executive Vice President of International Networks at Orange, and Vijay Vurisiskala, Principal Engineer and Director and Network Architecture at Google. Until next time, thank you, and please stay safe, stay healthy.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you all.
See you.